When my phone buzzed on Thursday afternoon, just 10 minutes past 4, I knew exactly what the message would say. Still, I checked it anyway. As expected, it was from Emerson Burke, my private investigator. The message was brief. She's been served. My wife, Martha Harrington, was more than just a spouse. She was a mother, sister, daughter, and a close friend to many. Professionally, she held the esteemed position of senior partner at Willington and Compton, a renowned law firm in the Hartford area. Part of her duties as senior partner was to oversee the casework of 7 junior partners. She held mandatory meetings twice a week for these junior associates, every Monday morning at 10 o'clock and Thursday afternoons at 4 o'clock. Punctuality was a must, and anyone arriving late would endure Martha's pointed criticism for the duration of the meeting. The sheriff delivered the divorce papers to Martha during one of those Thursday meetings, precisely 2 minutes past 4. Following my instructions, he said, "Mrs. Harrington, your husband is filing for divorce. You have been officially served." After 23 years of marriage, I knew my wife well. Being served in front of her subordinates would leave her utterly humiliated. Despite the seething anger undoubtedly boiling within her, she wouldn't rush home. Instead, she'd retreat to her office, locking the door behind her and pore over the divorce petition with the meticulous eye of an experienced attorney. Martha would likely find the first reading of the legal document perplexing. I had cited the classic irreconcilable differences as the reason for the divorce. She'd likely feel relieved that I hadn't mentioned infidelity, but would undoubtedly suspect that I knew about her long-term affair with Michael Kinsley, a married 29-year-old associate at her firm. She would also be puzzled by the division of assets. The petition outlined that we'd split the proceeds from the sale of our 7,300 square foot primary residence and our beachfront summer home on the Connecticut shore. She would retain her retirement accounts, and I would keep mine. After all debts were paid, our banking and checking accounts would also be divided. Since we both earned significant incomes, alimony wasn't necessary. But the glaring omission of my successful third-generation engineering firm as an asset would leave her baffled. Martha knew my divorce attorney by reputation. Over the years, she'd even recommended her to a few friends in need of such services, often referring to her as a shark. She'd be astonished that an attorney of such high regard could overlook something so vital. Suspicious of foul play, Martha would likely call an emergency meeting with her most trusted colleagues. Together, they'd analyze the papers and devise an initial strategy to counter her wimpy husband, me. My name is Chris Harrington. I met Martha while attending the University of Connecticut. She was in her second year of law school, and I was completing my PhD in mechanical engineering. We started dating just a week after we met and quickly became exclusive. After a lovely dinner on our third date, as we walked to the car, Martha turned to me and said, "Let's go to your apartment and get undressed." From that moment on, we were inseparable, spending the entire weekend together. Our connection was electric. We couldn't get enough of each other. Our intimacy was frequent and adventurous, even indulging in some risky escapades in public places. Martha seemed to relish the bond we shared just as much as I did. I fell deeply in love with her. Martha was the complete package. Early on, we promised one another that we'd remain faithful and never bring others into our relationship. This promise was solidified during our wedding vows, where we pledged to love, honor, cherish, and remain true to one another. Our wedding, held 2 weeks after we both received our advanced degrees, was a grand celebration. It took place in Martha's hometown of Portland, Maine. The reception was held under large tents on a warm, clear summer evening at a venue along Maine's rocky coastline. We honeymooned in Aruba and returned without any tan lines. Shortly after our return, Martha began interviewing with several Hartford area law firms. Within 2 weeks, she was offered a position at Willington and Compton. Over the next 2 decades, we built a life together. We fell deeper in love, raised 2 amazing children, and managed the balancing act of demanding careers and family life. I took over my family's engineering business, buying out my father's shares when he retired 12 years ago. Meanwhile, Martha advanced in her career, becoming a junior partner after 7 years and a senior partner by year 16. Life seemed perfect until everything changed. 3 years ago, I found a turd in the punch bowl of our seemingly perfect life. One day at the office, I received an anonymous letter. The envelope was addressed to me with personal and confidential written across the bottom. Inside, I found a folded piece of notebook paper with the words, "Your wife is in love with Michael Kinsley," and a photograph of Martha and Michael standing in the doorway of what appeared to be a rundown motel. I immediately hired a highly recommended private investigator. Within 2 months, I had an overwhelming amount of evidence proving Martha's infidelity. After another month of careful planning and pretending to be the loving husband and friend Martha thought I was, I assembled my team. It included my private investigator, a divorce attorney, my business attorney, and my accountant. I outlined my goals and informed them it might take years to execute my plan. Their job was to ensure that every step I took was legal and couldn't be used against me during the divorce proceedings. Later that same afternoon at 5:50 p.m., I received another text from my private investigator. Michael Kinsley has been served. 2 weeks prior, my investigator had met with Rachel Kinsley, Michael's wife. He shared the details of his 3-year investigation, along with irrefutable evidence of her husband's affair with Martha. Rachel was provided with a recommendation from my divorce attorney, who gladly agreed to take her case. I imagined the legal strategy Martha's colleagues had crafted during their emergency meeting would be rendered useless. Rachel's divorce petition cited infidelity as the cause and included the investigator's comprehensive report, complete with photos and videos. It was a damning package. At 8:10 p.m., the garage door rumbled open. 4 hours had passed since Martha had been served. I sat at the head of our 10-person dining room table, a second chair placed at the far end. The remaining 8 chairs had been moved to the basement. I poured a glass of Martha's favorite red wine and set it in front of the chair opposite me. As I heard the door from the garage to the kitchen open and Martha call out, I took a sip of my slightly chilled bourbon. The sharp clack of her heels echoed on the tiled kitchen floor. She likely checked the family room, my office, and the living room before finding me in the dining room. Martha paused in the archway, surveying the setup, then moved to the chair at the far end of the table. After sitting, she reached for the wine glass, lifted it in a brief toast, and took a long sip. It was several moments before she spoke. "I don't want a divorce," she finally said. "I know," I replied evenly, "and I don't want a cheating wife." "Chris, please, let's talk like adults," she implored. "Yes, I've had an affair, but I'm not a cheating woman," I countered. "You've told me dozens of times over the years that a cheating woman is one who lets another man have her in ways she won't let her husband." "Those were your words, Martha. I didn't need to elaborate." I knew she'd given Michael pleasures she had denied me for years. Her face flushed red, and she began breathing through her mouth, clearly trying to suppress her anger. "Why did you have to ruin Michael's family?" she finally asked. "He has 2 wonderful children who will now grow up without their father at home." I choked back a laugh and shook my head. "Have you seen Rachel Kinsley? She's stunning. Her kids will have a new father at home soon enough, and I'd bet he won't be a cheating jerk like your lover. Why should I care about Michael's family? He didn't care about mine." Martha clenched her jaw and hissed, "I've asked you to speak to me respectfully." "Your language isn't helping." I smirked, knowing it rattled her. "Martha, I'm not trying to help. If you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave. I won't stop you." As expected, she didn't budge. "How long have you known?" she asked. Rather than answer, I picked up a copy of the anonymous letter and photo I'd received 3 years ago and slid them across the table. Martha studied the letter and photo, then examined the envelope, noting the postmark. "3 years? You've known for 3 years but haven't done anything?" she asked, incredulous. I chuckled. "Oh, I've done plenty. You had a 4-hour meeting today to prepare for this conversation." "I've had 3 years." The shadow of deep concern that crossed her face was satisfying. I continued. "For instance, we haven't been intimate since I found out. Other than a peck on the cheek, we've hardly touched. It's been 3 years since we've shared a loving hug, and you didn't even notice." "I thought you'd lost interest in love," she admitted. I laughed heartily. "No, I only lost interest in love with you." She hesitated, then asked, "Have you really gone 3 years without it?" I grinned. "Without it from you? Absolutely. But if the videos I've seen are any indication, I've had far more satisfying encounters than you have." Martha's stunned expression said it all. "The difference is," I added, "I have proof of your escapades. You don't have anything on me." Chris, I love you. I always have. My time with Michael meant nothing. It was just a way to relieve stress, especially after you stopped being intimate with me, she pleaded. Don't go there, Martha, I replied coldly. Your 3-year affair is your doing. Don't you dare try to pin this on me. Martha took a moment to compose herself. Regardless, I love you and I know you love me, she said. You're wrong, I replied firmly. For 3 years, you've lied to me, broken our vows, and humiliated me in the worst ways imaginable. It took time, but the love I had for you faded. I don't love you anymore, Martha. In fact, I don't even like you. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over as she jumped to her feet and fled the room. I didn't follow. I knew she'd be back. I suspected she'd return ready for a fight, and I wasn't wrong. When Martha came back, she had changed into jeans and a blouse. She sat down, refilled her glass from the wine bottle I'd left at her end of the table, and began. Chris, I think you need to reconsider this whole thing. I've got an incredible team at the office, and with the help of an outside divorce attorney, you stand to lose a lot. I know Sharon Brown, referring to my lawyer, is a good attorney, but I've already spotted glaring mistakes in the petition she filed. If we can't agree on a way to move forward, I'll let my team loose on you. Martha's frustration grew with every smile and laugh I gave her. Once again, I smiled broadly. That's the difference between your team and mine. Your team will begin tomorrow. My team has been working deliberately and methodically for 3 years. Your team may start the war, but my team's work is already finished. I let that sink in before continuing. I'll take your word that you love me. I'm not sure how that's possible after 3 years of deceit, but fine. I'll accept that you love me. What I can almost guarantee is that by the time this divorce is finalized, you'll hate me. And the funny thing? Everything you'll hate me for has already happened. You just don't know about it yet. Martha yelled, You'll never turn our kids against me. I'd never try to turn the kids against you, I replied evenly. In fact, I haven't even spoken to them yet. I'll call them over the weekend, along with both sets of parents and our siblings. I'll tell them I've filed for divorce because of your long-term affair. I'll ask them to treat you with respect and to continue their relationship with you. But that will be their decision. If anyone doubts the depth of your betrayal, I'll send them the private investigator's report. But I suspect you'll prefer to confirm the affair yourself rather than let them see it. Martha hated losing, and she was beginning to realize how far behind she was. But instead of backing down, she exploded. I'm going to take your company away from you, she screamed. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. She thought threatening my business was her trump card, but I turned it back on her. My company? What company is that? I asked innocently. She glared at me like I had 2 heads and snapped, Precision Engineering. I'm going to take it over. My grin lasted longer than she liked. Her anger grew as she shouted, What? I finally answered in the most condescending tone I could muster. Sweetheart, don't you remember? We sold Precision Engineering to the Swedes 2 years ago. That's illegal, she retorted. The company is a marital asset, and I didn't agree to any sale. True, I acknowledged. You didn't agree to the sale. However, you did grant me broad power of attorney for all business matters. In fact, your firm drafted the document. I used that power of attorney to complete the sale and move the proceeds to overseas accounts. You signed off on our family tax returns every year, which clearly documented the sale and the transfer of funds. Good luck finding the money now. It's been 2 years. Martha was stunned, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish. Without another word, I got up and left the room, heading upstairs to the guest room. After locking the door, I stripped to my boxers, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally allowed myself to cry. My alarm went off at 3 a.m. the next morning. I showered, packed, and left for the airport to catch a flight to Florida. I'd prepared for my new single life by purchasing a condo on Clearwater Beach, just across the bay from Tampa. Martha had been shocked the night before, but it would take weeks for her and her legal team to comb through documents and financial statements before they realized that nearly $34 million from the sale of Precision Engineering had never passed through a U.S. bank. It would be outside the divorce settlement's reach. That realization would be a lifetime shock for her. If family traditions were any indication, the next phase of my plan would hit in 5 weeks, the Friday after Thanksgiving. Martha had always been close to her maternal grandmother, Edith, who started a cherished family tradition decades ago. Every Christmas, they displayed a 175-year-old family nativity scene. The figurines, kept in individual velvet-lined boxes, were stored in a bank's safety deposit box for most of the year. Each year, on the Friday after Thanksgiving, Martha retrieved the boxes, while the kids and I picked out 2 Christmas trees. Decorating the house was a family event, with the nativity scene as the centerpiece. It brought Martha to tears of joy every year. The decorations stayed up until the day before we returned to work in January. Martha would carefully repack each figurine and take them back to the bank. Except for last year. Last year, Martha asked me to take the figurines to the bank before my flight. I agreed. As expected, her text arrived immediately after Thanksgiving. "Where the hell are my figurines, you jerk?" I laughed so hard that coffee sprayed from my nose. My neighbor Kate, a 38-year-old divorcee, walked by just in time to see the spectacle. She laughed and asked, "Do you need to answer that? Or can we go another round before I leave?" Kate left soon after, but I checked my phone to find numerous missed calls and messages from Martha, her family, and our kids. Reluctantly, I called Martha back. She answered with a hiss. "What the hell took you so long?" "I was with a neighbor," I said bluntly, making her pause. "I want my nativity scene back. Now," she demanded. "Sure," I replied. "Go to the bank and get it." "Chris, I know you didn't take them to the bank last year. The last recorded access was when I retrieved them last Christmas." "Just give them back to me," she pleaded. "I'm sorry, Martha, but you're mistaken. I distinctly remember putting the boxes in your car before you left for work," I said calmly. Martha's voice cracked. "Oh, God! Why are you doing this to me? I know you're angry, but why be so cruel? It's amazing how you refuse to take responsibility for your choices," I said coldly. "Goodbye, Martha." I hung up. Over the next few hours, I called everyone who had contacted me, repeating the same message. Martha was stirring up trouble as the court date approached. I doubted they believed me, but I was confident they couldn't prove I had the figurines. Our divorce was finalized 14 months later. Martha fought tooth and nail, even involving police and insurance investigators over the nativity scene. My only statement was, "I distinctly remember putting the boxes in Martha's car." Nobody could prove otherwise. Years later, I learned that Martha had been battling aggressive breast cancer. As her final days approached, my daughter asked me to visit her mother. When I entered the hospice room, Martha was asleep. Watching her brought back a flood of memories, and I had to fight back tears. When she woke, she startled me by saying, "You were right, you know." I looked at her and smiled. Of course, I was always right, but what about this time? Her smile wavered as she said, "You told me I'd hate you by the end of the divorce. After everything I did to you and our family, I'm ashamed to admit that I hated you for a long time." "Right back at you, Martha," I replied, smiling. Her smile returned. "Chris, do you still hate me?" she asked softly. I paused. Number hate takes too much energy. After a while, I just didn't have the strength. "How about you?" Martha nodded slowly. "I agree," she said as tears filled her eyes. "I agree. After a while, hate isn't worth the effort," she replied. We talked for nearly 2 hours, sharing memories and stories. As I was finishing an old tale about when our kids were young, I noticed Martha had fallen asleep. My first instinct was to leave, but I reconsidered, realizing this might be the last time I'd see her alive. When Martha woke up from her hour-long nap, we continued reminiscing. Laughter filled the room as we talked like old friends. In the middle of our conversation, our son Brian, his wife Sue, and their 3 children walked in. I could tell immediately that Brian was happy I had come to visit his mom. I didn't stay much longer, wanting Brian and his family to have Martha's undivided attention. As I said my goodbyes, I leaned down and gave Martha a gentle kiss on the lips. Just as I turned to leave, Martha called out, "Chris, can I ask you a favor?" I nodded, signaling my agreement. Martha looked over at Brian. "Would you give your dad and me a moment alone?" she asked. Brian and Sue quickly gathered their children and left the room. Once we were alone, Martha continued. "I'd like Brian's family and Rose's family to alternate displaying the nativity scene at Christmas. Do you think you could help make that happen? While many families spent the Friday after Thanksgiving hunting for sales at the mall, my family gathered at my daughter Rose's home. Brian's family, Rose's family, and I spent the day decorating her house. Candles and wreaths were placed in every window. Lights adorned the bushes in the front yard, and Christmas themed knickknacks were scattered throughout the rooms on the first floor. We all agreed the centerpiece was in Rose's family room. There, two tall, 12-foot trees stood on either side of a straw covered table. 3 rows of poinsettias formed a protective barrier around the table, and atop it sat the 24 pieces of Martha's beloved nativity scene. Before leaving for the evening, Brian and Rose joined me for one last look at the figurines. Tears streamed down my face as I remembered Martha years ago, standing in front of the display, crying softly and calling it her happy place. And so we've reached the conclusion of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a turn you didn't see coming? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. If this story kept you engaged, don't forget to hit the like button. If you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.